If you're anything like me, when you hear anyone talking about anamorphic lenses, you just sort of tune out because your first reaction is that they're too big, too heavy, and too expensive to be practical on most run and gun shoots. And even though I really like the anamorphic look most of the time, it's just not something that's ever really made sense for me as a documentary cinematographer. But all the reasons why anamorphic hasn't made sense, so like the weight, the size, and the price, those things might be finally a thing to the past thanks to these guys, the Surui Saturns. They're tiny, full-frame carbon fiber lenses that weigh less than a Sigma Art Prime and cost much less than a Sony G Master. That's pretty wild, and it means that doc filmmakers and run and gun teams might finally have an anamorphic option that makes sense for life on the road. But just because they're practical doesn't mean that I'm automatically sold on them. So in this video, I'm gonna get them out of the office and put them through their paces in a real-world shooting scenario to see how they stack up to normal lenses and whether or not they're worth investing in yourself. Okay, so super fast, what are anamorphic lenses and why are they different from normal or spherical lenses? And don't worry, we're not gonna spend a long time here like one of those cooking blogs that gives you 3 pages about the history of tomatoes before the recipe.
The tomato. One of the most popular fruits in the entire world.
But I do think it's important to touch on quickly. If you already know this stuff, I'll put a time code somewhere on the screen down here so you can skip ahead without listening to my overly simplistic explanation. But if you don't know what I'm talking about right now, just know that odds are most of the lenses you have, like the G Masters or the Sigmas or the Canons or whatever, they're all spherical. A spherical lens takes in light from the world and refracts it back onto the camera's sensor without modifying it. An anamorphic lens like these though projects a stretched image onto your sensor that looks kind of terrible right out of camera and needs to be de-squeezed to look normal. But after you do that, you get a super wide aspect ratio that has a ton of detail and depth, plus some really interesting bokeh. So like when you watch a movie in theaters and it's got that really wide look that somehow just feels different to what you're getting out of your camera, it's probably anamorphic. The poor man's version of this cinematic look is when you shoot with spherical lenses and just add black bars to the top and bottom of the frame, which you've probably done before or at least seen before, but optically it's just not the same thing. Now I can already feel myself getting sucked into a technical explanation that's dangerously boring and I honestly barely understand it myself, so I'm gonna cut this off and just link to a detailed article below if you want to dive deep into how it all works. But for this video, all we need to know is that the Hollywood look is more often than not shot anamorphic, which, apart from the massive budgets and highly trained professionals, is a big part of the reason why their movies generally look different than yours. Anamorphics also flare in a really distinct way, so like think of J.J. Abrams' Star Trek adaptations, which is either good or bad depending on your perspective, and we'll get into how that applies to docs later on. Basically though, anamorphics tend to create images that are beautifully wide, they're flattering to faces, and they have a lot of depth and character. So what's not to love? Well, for starters, they're usually huge and expensive, like we said, and since docs are focused on the real world, not all filmmakers need this look so badly to make it worth the trade-offs. Like an Atlas Orion lens, which is sort of considered a budget anamorphic lens, weighs 5 pounds and costs nearly 10 grand, so these are real factors. And if you upgrade to something like an ARRI Master anamorphic, the price goes up closer to $25,000 a lens. These Saturn lenses though weigh less than a pound or half a kilo and cost about $1,100, so it's a pretty crazy difference and it removes a lot of the traditional objections to shooting anamorphic. Now the full set I have here comes with 3 lenses, a 35, a 50, and a 75, and for me that's enough of a range for the way I shoot most of the time. Honestly though, using anamorphics hasn't really been a choice I've had to make very often because not many doc production companies are asking for anamorphic looks because of all the disadvantages I just mentioned, but these lenses could change that. But the point of the video isn't to just talk about these lenses, it's to actually try them in some typical documentary situations to see how they compare to the lenses I'm used to and whether or not I could see myself shooting a real project with them. I won't lie, I'm a little skeptical here, so let's just get out of the office and meet up with my friend Emmanuel to see whether or not they're worth it. Okay, so we are out here in this random field in downtown Toronto. We probably picked the hottest possible day to do this on. The very first thing we're gonna try is just a really standard interview setup. I wanna compare what an anamorphic lens looks like compared to a spherical lens. Nothing crazy, we're not using lights, we're not using any crazy grip gear, just natural light only. I'm gonna stick Emmanuel, who's operating the camera, we're gonna put him down, frame something really basic up, and then I'm gonna swap over to a Sigma of a comparable focal length, and then we're gonna look at just how different the two shots are. Like, is there really something cinematic about anamorphic? I don't know, let's see them side by side. One thing to note right off the bat is because of the de-squeeze factor of these lenses, like the amount that the final image has to be compressed to get it looking normal, it's 1.6 on these lenses, but Sony cameras only de-squeeze at 1.3 and 2 times, which means I'm mostly seeing the proper image here, but not quite, because I can't get the proper de-squeeze ratio. It's really easy to fix in post. It's not going to impact the final image at all. Just something to be aware of. Okay, so I actually don't know how that looked. I won't know until I get it onto a computer. It might be my imagination, but I thought like the Saturns had a little bit more character, like they just looked a little bit more interesting. But now what I want to do is actually get the camera off the tripod, and we're going to put a manual back there near those industrial buildings and wander around a little bit, because I want to know what it's like to actually handhold this thing and operate it, and what it would be like to follow a character around in a real documentary. So we'll get this thing off sticks and we'll head back there and get some more standard documentary scene following coverage and see how that works. Some of the things I'm noticing I really like, and some of the things are a little more difficult. What works really well is the build quality and the general lightness of these things. Like, it is crazy how lightweight these are. They were, I think, designed to go on gimbals and drones and stuff, but definitely these are the lightest lenses I've ever used, probably, and that's just not what you expect out of an anamorphic lens. From an operator perspective, this is great. You know, it's not super front heavy, it's not killing my arms or my wrist, it's really comfortable. I also think that this has been built really well, like the way the aperture and the focus ring turn, it's super smooth, it's really nice, really good build quality. I like it all around. One thing I am noticing is that minimum focus distance is quite far. I think that's normal in anamorphics, but if you're used to shooting with Sigmas or something where you can shoot from, you know, a foot away, that's not going to happen with these. I don't know exactly what the minimum focusing distance is, but I'd say I was probably like 3 or 4 feet away and struggling sometimes. So it's something to keep in mind. You will have to stay a little bit further away from your subjects than you might normally. But overall, build quality, user experience has been really good. So the last thing we're going to do is wait for nighttime, because we came out here to this skate park because there's really strong overhead lights. And when you think of anamorphic lenses, I think one of the first things that comes to mind is lens flare. I'm really curious to see what this flare is like, because I like flares, but I also don't want my documentary to look like some sort of J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie. I got the neutral version instead of the blue flare version, so hopefully it's a little bit more subtle. But yeah, that'll be the last test we do here. So another thing anamorphic lenses are sort of classically famous for is having really nice bokeh. So I'm just shooting up into this tree to get a lot of depth of field and out of focus elements to see if it is really as legendary as people say. Honestly, it does look really interesting. Like, I'm looking at these bokeh balls in the background. I'm sort of close focusing on this grass and letting the lights in the background go out of focus. And there's just a kind of quality to them that I'm not used to seeing in the spherical lenses that I always shoot with. So I'm not saying I'm like a convert or anything, because logistically there's so many reasons why shooting anamorphic would be a big challenge on a documentary, but from what I'm seeing, it is a really, really cool look. I'm impressed. Okay, so we spent a little bit shooting around here. It's starting to get dark enough where I think we can actually go over to the skate park now and see what these flares look like. I haven't seen any flaring at all yet, and I'm wondering if the neutral as opposed to the blue means that there are no flares at all. I thought that they were just going to be sort of more whitish looking flares than blue, but so far I haven't seen anything. So we're going to go under these really strong outdoor lights and see what we get. Wow, man, I got old. All the kids are riding scooters. They're not even skateboarding. So we just walked around the skate park using a lot of these overhead lights to try and see what kind of flares we could get. And at first, I didn't think there were any flares at all. I kind of thought maybe the neutral option meant it didn't flare. Then once I figured it out, you need some, bright lights at specific angles shining right into the lens. And once I got the hang of it and started to play with it, you can actually get some really cool results. I personally really liked it. I kind of didn't expect to. I thought I would probably think it was gimmicky or overdone looking, like one of those screw-on filters that, puts this huge blue line through everything. But it actually looked really great. I am very impressed. First impressions, really well done, surprisingly well done. Okay, so that was an insanely sweaty few hours, but it was a great test, and I'm actually pretty surprised with the experience. To be honest, I sort of expected to feel ambivalent about these lenses at best, but I actually really liked them. They are so light that I actually noticed the difference on my rig, and they're well built, and the focus operates really well, and all the aperture rings feel super smooth, and just all around great build quality. And the more I got used to the look I was getting from them, the more I started to feel that there really was something different feeling about the image. I'm not sure how exactly to describe it, except to say that the shots did somehow look deeper and had more character to them in a way that I really liked. But the real question is whether or not I'd use them myself and if I'd recommend them as an investment, which is a bit more complicated. The short version is that yes, I would definitely be open to using these, but not for everything. The reality is that most projects I do, especially where I'm hired as a DP by a production company, most of those shoots just aren't asking for anamorphic. When you shoot docs for networks and streamers, they typically want a more normal 16:9 ratio that fills the screen without the black bars. Now, sometimes if they really like your artistic vision, they might go for a 1:8:5 ratio or maybe 2:3:5 like they used in the trade when I worked on it, but that's not a standard, and as a DP, you might have to convince them why that's the right move. And by the way, even though the trade screened in that really wide 2:3:5 ratio, they didn't shoot it on anamorphic lenses. They shot it with spherical lenses with a 2:3:5 frame line in the monitor and then cropped it later. The Saturn lenses though shoot even wider than that with a D-squeezed ratio of 2.8:1, and all you really need to know about that is it's extremely wide. And don't forget that even though the set includes a 35, 50, and 75mm lens, when you divide it by the squeeze factor, so 1.6, you're actually working with more like a 22, a 31, and a 47. Luckily for me, my favorite primes are 24 and 50 most of the time, so it generally works well for me. But all you need to know is that these lenses are wide. And like I mentioned earlier, it's such an unusual ratio that my camera and monitor wouldn't even process it internally, and I had to shoot with a 2.35 D-squeeze applied to my monitor and then guess a little bit what it would look like. Not really a huge deal, and I'm sort of using an old monitor right now, so probably other monitors out there can handle custom ratios like this a little easier. But for lots of people, it's good to know that you can't just stick these on your camera and start shooting like you might be used to. And when you do get the footage processed properly in the edit, it's probably going to be wider than anything you've ever shot before, which looks really unique, and I like it a lot. But it won't be right for every project. Now, personally, after staring at these test shots for a while now, I have to say that I really do love the look, much more than I thought I would. For a personal project where the extreme widescreen look would work, or maybe for a narrative shoot or a cinematic commercial, I would love to break these out. I'm actually planning a music doc in Kenya for this winter, and now I'm seriously considering shooting the whole thing with these. But for my bread and butter doc jobs, even the high-end ones, a lot of directors and network execs might push back on such a unique unique look. If you do more narrative stuff or commercials or music videos like Emmanuel does, or if you're only interested in getting a really unique look for your personal work, then these might see a lot more action. Just be aware that this isn't a standard ratio for any sector of the industry that I know of, but if you're okay with that, then these might be some of the most interesting lenses out there. The insanely lightweight, the low cost, and the overall quality of the image are way better than I was expecting, and I'm genuinely surprised at how much I like them. So well done, Surui. Seriously, I kind of thought I was gonna blast these things and then have a really awkward conversation with the pissed off Surui rep and then never hear from them again. So liking them so much is a very pleasant surprise for me. And if you understand and are okay with these eccentricities, and you want a unique widescreen look with a lot of depth and texture and flaring that isn't over the top, then these are the most interesting anamorphic lenses for dock shooters that I've ever seen. Personally, I'd go with the neutral flare version over the blue, but that's kind of up to your taste. They're light enough for gimbal and drone work too, so there really isn't anything else like them out there, and I'll personally be looking for reasons to use these, but only time will tell how often that'll be. If you are into them though, Surui is giving viewers of this channel a 5% discount to sweeten the deal, so check out the link below and use the code LukeSaturn. So my final verdict is that these aren't for everyone, but they are for a lot more people than anamorphic lenses have ever been in the past. And if you are looking for something a little different and you aren't bound up in the industry conventions, these are an incredible value and unlike anything else out there. Dock shooters finally have access to affordable and portable anamorphics, and that's something I didn't expect to see. See ya.